Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Wartime Erasure of Palestine, presented by Vashti Media and Equator magazine. I'm Evan Robbins. I'm the executive editor, of Vashti. For those of you who don't know us, we're a London-based magazine covering the politics, ideas, and culture of the Jewish left and the left at large. I encourage you to visit our website, vashtimedia.com, and subscribe to our newsletters to receive updates on our work and on other upcoming events. Tonight, I'm grateful that you've joined us for this important discussion on the acceleration of Israeli genocide and annexation under the cover of war on Iran and the invasion of Lebanon, as the world has turned its attention away from Palestine. A quick programming note. Unfortunately, Mariam Barghouti will not be able to join us tonight as she's under the weather. We will miss her voice in this conversation, but we hope to have her on a future event, so look out for that. Tonight's discussion will go on for about 1 hour. Please feel free to use the Q&A function if you would like to ask a question, though I can't promise we'll have enough time to get to all questions at the end. Our moderator tonight is Hamza Yusuf, a British-Palestinian writer and political researcher. His work has been featured in Declassified UK, Middle East Eye, The Nation, 972 Magazine, and elsewhere, and he is a contributing writer at Vashti Media. We're also joined tonight by Basel Adra. Basel is an activist, journalist, and photographer from the village of At-Tuwani in the South Hebron Hills. He's a West Bank reporter for 972 Magazine and co-director of the Oscar-winning documentary No Other Land. And finally, I'm pleased to welcome Mohammed R. Mhawish. Mohammed is an award-winning Palestinian writer and journalist from Gaza City, currently living in exile. He's a contributor to The Nation, The New Yorker, and New York Magazine, a fellow at Type Media Center, and a contributing reporter to the Palestine Reporting Lab. But before we begin, I'd like to welcome Gavin Jacobson, a founding editor of Equator, to come on and say a few words.
My thanks to Evan, and thanks everyone for coming this evening. Equator is very pleased to join Vashti Media in convening this evening's deliberations. For the uninitiated, Equator is a new magazine of politics, culture, and ideas, and emerged last October as a kind of fledgling organ of political and cultural critique, one that was born of a specific historical impatience. The animating impulse behind our launch was the recognition that the current catastrophe in Gaza and the West Bank is not merely a regional paroxysm, but a story that matters to the whole world. The sheer velocity of dispossession and the industrial scale of the ruin have summoned a kind of constituency of conscience without modern precedent. Across the world, a vast public has found itself not merely spectator to these events, but morally reconfigured by them, possessing a sudden, urgent hunger for clarity that the existing order is sort of structurally incapable of providing. This, of course, brings us to the profound dereliction of the Atlanticist media. The mainstream press has reached a kind of singular nadir, a discourse where the slaughter of innocents is subjected to the grotesque calculus of moral permissibility, and where headlines are reduced to bloodless tautologies. And we think that such outlets have forfeited their authority to narrate the world. And at Equator, we proceed from the conviction that the venerable titles of the Anglophone West are beyond the reach of internal reform. Their periodic retreats, their belated mea culpas, are less signs of renewal than they are of the sort of the death rattles of a legacy of complicity. And so the task, is not to petition the old guard for better behavior, but to construct something new. And so I invite everyone to engage with our project at equator.org, to visit our website, to read our pieces, and, if you feel so compelled, to subscribe and most importantly, to spread the word. And with that, it's now my pleasure to hand the discussion over to Hamza.
Thank you, Evan and Gavin. This is proud to be hosting this and moderating this very important event. I think it's important that we frequently have these conversations just to maybe contextualize what's happening and to kind of understand all the different dynamics from those deeply affected and also those who can offer rounded perspectives. We're obviously here as Israel's committing, multiple atrocities across multiple countries. And I'll begin with you, Bas, if that's okay. Israel clearly senses an opening and an opportunity. It's got a compliant president, a compliant international community, and we're witnessing its war with Iran. We're into the third year of the genocide in Gaza, It's continuing the war on Lebanon and the war on the Palestinians. Well, the ethnic cleansing, the systematic erasure of the Palestinians, irrespective of where they are. So how do you connect what Israel's doing in Lebanon and Iran to what it's doing in the West Bank and Gaza? In the sense, this is being framed in so many different ways. We hear these robotic recitations about self-defense, retaliation, but this obviously goes beyond that. So I was wondering, Basil, especially with your perspective on the West Bank, how you connect everything that Israel is engaging in at the minute.
Thank you all for joining, and thanks to those who organized this event. Yeah, I will just say that the West Bank have been since decades the target and the goal for Israel of ethnic cleansing us as Palestinians from West Bank and expansion, illegal project settlements and outposts and military bases and settlers' roads. So we always face the same policy, the same actions from Israeli settlers whenever the world eyes going in somewhere else. So when it was like the genocide in Gaza, before that the pandemic of Corona, and you can go on all the actions, all the accidents that would happen in the world, and like take the eyes of the world and the attention of the world somewhere else from here. This is a golden time for Israel and its settlers and its occupation military on the ground. And this you can see very clear from the numbers of, for example, the settlers' terror against like Palestinian communities, cities and towns across the West Bank, the demolition numbers by Israeli occupation forces, the arrests of Palestinians, journalists, children, women, men. Uh, so, um, unfortunately, we always like are target of these policies, and it increased when something bigger happened in the world. When like and yeah, with the war with Iran and Lebanon, the same thing. Restriction of like with the first like rocket they shot to Iran, they sent like their bulldozers to close like our villages, our cities, our towns. They start like restrict all the movement of us as Palestinians living here, closing checkpoints and blocking our roads. Really, for the first 4 days. With the war of Iran, our village, which we are living like approximately 300 people in one small village, was blocked, totally blocked, and nothing has to do with us. It's just they have a war with Iran, so they have to block us and to make the roads only used by Israeli settlers and its military across the West Bank. So we were not able to go buy food, or if we have like emergency situation, people need to go to hospital in the night or in the day, or to buy medicine, or teachers coming to school, or students want to go to school as well. So totally, there's no any movement to go around. And those who try to go from like, let's say, rubble roads with like 4x4 cars or with tractors, simply would be stopped by settlers or soldiers, and they would take the key of your car, of your tractor, and leave you there and move away. I'm speaking about like the the day-to-day life, not a big actions, just to move from a city to another, or a village to a city to buy your needs. It became like impossible. And you can move on, like as we said, to the attacks by Israeli settlers. They would come attack you in the home or in the field nearby your village, inside your village, and the military for sure, like they work hand by hand with the settlers, and they always use this like security situation against us, so as treat us always as a suspicious. So even they see like armed settlers masked, coming to your village, you are the suspicious. So they shoot at you. The soldiers, when they come, they arrest you. Um, you have to always to move back and to be attacked. and you're not allowed to defend yourself. And we can see like all this, like especially the genocide in Gaza, and now it's continuing. Like how the settlers also dealing with it. Like Israel say about it's about security, but it has a ministers and generals in the military and settlers who clearly calling out for building settlements in Gaza. And we saw that they start to build, and they are actually back in Jenin. Those are two places where they moved out their settlements in 2005, and now they're in Jenin. They back to build the settlement, and now they're opening roads and mean like establishing roads for the settlers. It means they are to destroy Palestinian homes and lands and crops in order to create a settlement road for the settlers. And we see those settlers now calling again for building settlements in South Syria and South Lebanon. So this is like always when the Israel has two faces. I would say, the face that know how to speak to with the West in the language in English and saying it's all about security, we're defending ourselves, and Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. And you have, but in the under the table, they know what they're doing. That it's not defending themselves, and it's not about security. It's always about occupying more and more lands, and these policies is said out by the ministers in the government. And UK, you have two examples like Smotrich and Ben Gvir, and they're the people who vote for them, and the settlers who's making actions on the ground, by going and trying to, and they entered Gaza, I mean, during the genocide several times, and Lebanon, and Syria. So, unfortunately, it's crazy when you see like how diplomats and how politicians around the world deal with these situations and the actions on the ground. There's a huge gap when they say we're like opposing occupation and settlements and settlers, and at the same time their airports are open for these settlers and soldiers that are committing crimes. Their markets are opened for the goods are made and planted on our land in these illegal settlements. So it's really a crazy situation. Today we're left in a situation is really hard to explain it, to be honest. I mean, it's easy to explain it, but also we sometimes feel we're speaking to the world who's not interested to do something to stop these crimes.
Yeah, I think you've raised a few very important points, and everything you've touched on is really profound, and in particular the two faces and what they say. When you see what the Israelis speak and how they express unambiguously now, the head of the army chief, the head of the army in the West Bank, recently said we're killing in numbers like in 1967. They're now openly boasting about what they do. They're proud of their actions, and nobody seems to take notice. And it's interesting. My family had the same experience in the West Bank, where immediately after October 7 and immediately after during the war with Iran, it's like whatever happens outside the Palestinians in the West Bank, it's a policy of deliberate. It's almost mockery. It's like Israel's fighting a front here, or Israel's engaging in something here, and as a result, all the Palestinians will suffer. And I wanted to bring Mohammed in on this because I think the exact same equation applies when we're talking about Gaza. You spoke, or you said recently, that you think the Iran war was a disaster for Gaza in the sense that it leaves it isolated, vulnerable, and friendless. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? And also, this was written in March, so this has been over 2 months now. How is your reading and your analysis of that, and in terms of this wider landscape and how this is all impacting Gaza, which already, as we've spoken about, is enduring hell on earth?
Of course, thank you for having me. I think very directly the war with Iran has had very severe consequences on Gaza. It may be a little bit far as a front, geographically speaking, but it sits at the core of the ramifications of what's unfolding there. Strategically speaking, I think the war has removed something concrete from Gaza's situation, which is Iranian deterrence. And for years, I think the fact that escalation against Gaza carried the risk of a wider regional response, it did somehow at least imposed some constraint on Israel's military calculations in Gaza. But right now, that constraint is gone because Iran's capacity to retaliate, to activate regional allies, and to make the coast of action in Gaza unpredictable has been like really severely diminished. And with whatever leadership succession is now happening in Tehran, it has been consumed by internal power struggles. And basically, Gaza is simply not going to be a priority for Iran, at least in the foreseeable future. And so I think this is practically leading me to say, Israel is operating in Gaza right now with less regional friction than at any point since October 2023. The diplomatic and military environment has never been more permissive, right? And we're seeing the results. We're seeing these accelerated operations in the West Bank. We're seeing this continued bombardment in Gaza. We're seeing the ethnic cleansing of communities in the north of the Strip that is proceeding with almost no international reaction. And regionally, I think the Gulf states, meanwhile, have their own recalibration to do after the Iran war settles. Now, Saudi Arabia and, for example, the UAE are focused on their own security relationships with Washington, with Washington and Israel. Now, the Abraham Accords, track whatever its status right now, it's oriented toward normalization, not towards Palestinian rights. And so the Arab world's political bandwidth for Gaza has contracted. It's, I think, safe to say that word at exactly the moment when Gaza needs it the most, right? Because Gaza is not in the post war phase. The destruction is still active and it's still ongoing. The material conditions on the ground and the regional realignment happening right now, whether the situation in Lebanon, the war in Lebanon, the war with Iran, the Gulf, realignment priorities. These are all systematically removing whatever friction of functionality and hope that people in Gaza had. And it's not basically a humanitarian situation that we're only describing in Gaza. It never was, because I think when we are framing it that way, especially as we're seeing it in the media right now, I don't think that really captures what is actually occurring, which is the deliberate and systematic destruction of a society's infrastructure, institutions, economy, social fabric, political future. All of that is being under really active destruction at the moment. If we have a moment to talk about the humanitarian conditions, for example, there is no functioning economy in Gaza. The one that existed, it was an aid economy that is basically now struck. The Gulf countries that were the warehouses of the aid that was coming into Gaza are now involved in securing their own airspace. They're involved in an active military front. Now, there is no employers in Gaza. There is no markets in any meaningful sense. No salaries even for most people who are working. So the aid infrastructure that was already overstretched before October 2023 has been systematically targeted and degraded. We're also talking about the warehouses in Gaza that were destroyed. The convoys are still blocked at the Rafah crossing. We're seeing also this intensification of restrictions on the NGO's operation in Gaza. And so There is also parts in Gaza where I am hearing from colleagues and friends where famine is still hovering there. It's not a past tense kind of situation. It's still happening as we speak. Um, and there is, in addition to all of that, there is the collapse of the medical system. Most hospitals are non-functional right now, or even operating at, far below capacity. The ones that are still doing a little bit of operation, they have no consistent electricity. They have no adequate supplies. We have seen doctors and staff and medical personnel displace themselves without any kind of system support. And some of them were even killed. Some of them were even detained. And so, I was told by colleagues on the ground that surgeries are taking place in backyards of hospitals without anesthesia. For a population that is already displaced and destroyed, because I think the physical destruction of Gaza is almost incomprehensible in scale. Over 60% of the residential compounds and structures were damaged and destroyed, according to satellite assessments. Now, there is also something harder to quantify, which is the social destruction. And for those who don't know what Gaza socially, the shape of its social fabric was before October 7th, it had dense intergenerational community structures, meaning extended families in the same neighborhoods for decades. There were local economies that were built on those relationships. There were schools, there were mosques, churches, cultural institutions that organized daily life. Now, that fabric has been shredded. The people themselves have been displaced 4, 5, even 6 times. And so the concept of home has been lost for most of the population. And now what is getting even more quiet and normalized in daily life is that a new form of dominating the population and the land through forms of surveillance that don't really get covered as much. Even during moments of so-called calm or supposedly the ceasefire, life in Gaza right now is operating under a level of surveillance that would have seemed dystopian before 2023. There are drones that are still hovering all over the skies. The people have learned really to watch out for the sky around the clock. People make decisions in real time about whether to move and where to go, and based on what's overhead. This is the new normal right now. There are children like really who can identify quadcopters and drones only by the specific kind of pitch to it. And in the meantime, people are still maintaining this kind of hope for what comes next. But it is very bleak, politically speaking. It is very uncertain what's coming ahead because there is no functioning or powerful Palestinian governance operating in Gaza right now. We're seeing this kind of political vacuum, and into it, there's this various actors that are stepping in totally from outside of Gaza with visions and plans and reconstruction agenda, supposedly to help the people. But I think these frameworks that are supposedly going to be resolving the situation, they're not going to be doing that in any way that helps the people. So I don't think any of these humanitarian kind of conditions and situations is going to be resolved overnight by having a reconstruction agenda implied. Now, the reconstruction of Gaza, to the extent that it is being planned for Palestinians without their engagement, without their participation. They're not part of the conversation. They don't have a seat at the table. Now, the people will live in whatever emerges, and they have no voice in what that is and how that could look like. So I don't think what's happening is far from the world, but it's being made complicated to describe, right? It is being made to seem complicated. it is as simple as that. 2 million people living with no food security, without any medical system, without governance, without any functioning economy, without even simple homes for most of them. And now there is no regional actor with both the will and the capacity to stop what's being done to them, simply. And so I think that's the ground reality.
I think that's really that's a comprehensive picture, and I think people often say Gaza's suffering, don't look away, and the genocide is ongoing, but they don't understand the daily life. They don't understand what it's like, and we can never put ourselves in the shoes of those who have endured this. And I wanted to just very briefly come back to you on one thing, because you've obviously you are effectively a survivor of genocide, and you wrote, I think back in 2024, because you survived a strike that killed relatives, friends. It had you under the rubble. You were trapped under the rubble alongside your children, your family. And you concluded by saying that these were your words, part of me is still buried under the rubble, and I don't know if I'll ever find it again. And this is an aspect, all the people I speak to in Gaza, it's like every single person has experienced, it's either grief, it's either survival, just about survival of an airstrike, has lost someone, has been trapped under the rubble, has had their home destroyed, has witnessed up close family being killed. As somebody who has endured this and who has witnessed it up close, this systematic destruction, this systematic annihilation, could you describe how the kind of the emotions or the feeling of being a survivor of genocide? Because people often lionize it. They look at it as, oh, look at the resilience of the Palestinians. But from your perspective, I would assume it's a very different perspective. Like, could you give us an insight, if you like, into how it feels to be effectively a survivor of Israel's horrors and their crimes?
Yes, of course. I think for most of my time, even after I left Gaza, I've been trying really to cover and report on what's happening. And that, simply to say, I'm reporting on the destruction of my own life, and community and people, because I still have, friends and colleagues and family there. And I'm, as a journalist, expected to be neutral to it. Somebody who's like in the middle between what's happening, as if, these kind of two-side situation, and I should be like professional and objective, right? But I don't think people realize that we as Palestinian journalists are aside to this. We reported on stories that we ourselves were enduring and going through the same. And I remember even, reporting from the ground in Gaza, when I pitch stories and propose kind of coverage for my editors, and they would get back to me to say, Hamad, we need stories about the people, not about you. We don't need personal stuff. And I was like, I am one of these people. I'm going through the same stories that I'm reporting on. At some point, in March 2024, I was diagnosed with acute malnutrition with my 2.5-year-old son at the time, which is, the stage that precedes starvation. And it happened to us as a result of, the shortages of food and water that we didn't really provide. We weren't able to have back then. And I was reporting on the starvation of the people while I was myself hungry and I couldn't have enough food for my family. I reported on the collapse of the medical system in the aftermath of the destruction of my house, when my family and I didn't have the medications that we needed and the treatment that was necessary for us. We went, to the hospital, and we were sent back to stay at a neighbor's, and all we got was first aid treatment. And so we didn't have a place to shelter. We were running between makeshift shelters. I reported on the targeting of journalists, when I was myself a target, basically. And I had to abandon my press vest at some point because it no longer provided me with the protection and the safety that I hoped I would get by that vest. Or, it did not at least provide me with the protection that international press is supposed to have in these places and these times. So I was myself a target. I was covering these stories, and I was witnessing the targeting of my fellow colleagues and journalist friends on the ground. And over, 200 journalists have been killed in Gaza, and over 50 of these 200 people I personally knew and worked with, over 50 of them. And so I could, see the targeting of my colleagues and friends and still pick up the assignment afterwards, because we believed if we didn't do that, nobody else would. So it was a responsibility for Palestinian journalists all over Gaza and even in the West Bank to carry out those stories and duties and national duties and responsibilities to ourselves and families and communities to tell the world what was being done to us. Right now, from exile, um, you know, my home was destroyed in December 2023. My neighborhood, the places where I was born and raised, in Gaza. And I'm right here trying to report those stories from afar and bring this kind of access to newsrooms, from ground level reporting. But I think the psychological toll of covering this, from exile is that I don't feel that I am in either place, right? I still have contacts, friends, colleagues in Gaza. And for example, to give you a sense of what it really feels like, I have, for example, to stay up, till 2 or 3 in the morning, New York time, to be able to conduct an interview with a survivor at 9 in the morning, Gaza time. So that is part of the day-to-day kind of operation of me reporting those stories. And I have to listen to these people and, operate under complete understanding to that, even though I am, grieving myself the loss of my own family members there and my own colleagues. And I'm on the phone with colleagues and friends who basically don't have enough to eat while I'm reporting my story here with a cup of coffee and a little bit of a sandwich. So it just feels like I'm detached from that place, but I can't fully heal. I can't fully move forward because I still have to maintain my connection to whatever I left behind. And so, part of my attention is always on the other side of my screen. I'm following the news all the time. If I'm not writing a story, if I'm not covering what's happening, I'm following the news to check in on loved ones and friends who are still there. So it's just a round the clock operation that really tears apart my psychological and mental space. And I don't think we have a choice because we're still, in the midst of that intensification, even though we have, 7 months almost now into so-called ceasefire, but we are losing people on a daily basis. I was talking to somebody on the ground, to a source for a story of mine, and they told me that what's being normalized is that people have gone from over 100 people killed a day to a few people killed a day, and that's now supposed to be normal, supposed to be something that people could read and move on. So this is also part of my job to make sure that this doesn't become normal, that the killing of people is still killing of people, whether it's 10 people or 90 people. There are people that are losing their families and they're losing their homes and they can't have enough to provide for their children and families. And that is not, okay, that is not supposed to be the new norm right now. So I think part of me is the survivor, yes, and I haven't really fully felt like I am in a position that separated me from what's happening in Gaza and what's happened to me even during the past 2 years. And I can't even feel the ability to just move fully ahead and just forget about what's happening back home, because I am part of what's happening and I'm still part of it, even though I am thousands of miles away.
Yeah, and I think that last point in particular is that these boundaries and these red lines keep getting redrawn, and people, you read nowadays and it's like 4 killed. Those, every single person, whether it's 104 or just 4, is a story. It's a universe, and I think there is an element of where we're normalizing the depth of Israel's crimes. I wanted to come back to you, Bassem, because on that topic, we're witnessing some of the stuff we see. It's almost like it seems lesser in scale, but is just as punishing in the West Bank. And there was a sit-in, a protest by school children recently in Masafer Yatta in the town of al Khair. Could you elaborate on, because there was a symbolic picture, wasn't there, that went viral, where it had Israeli soldiers who I believe fired tear gas at the students who were sitting in because their school had been closed for a few weeks. and they returned to expecting to return to their education, only to find the school still closed. Could you elaborate on that story for us, and also how Israel's oppression and occupation and ethnic cleansing in the West Bank is always so multi-pronged? It doesn't just exist in one form; it exists in multiple forms. And could you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure. So the story of Khair, and the school in the West Bank were closed for 40 days during the war with Iran. And once the school opened, the next day of the ceasefire, the student won't walk the regular road to go to school. They go from a village to another where they has their school. Yeah, and simply in the middle of the road was like during the night, two settlers established a fence and with Israeli flags on it, and this is how they closed the road. And when the students try to go through, this settler, the same one, block it, called the soldiers who arrived and immediately tear gas the students who ran from their place. Um, and came back. Since then, this road have been closed, and Khair since like July 2025, it's subject of different attacks. They first brought bulldozers and they start to dig in the other side of the village because right next to the village there was like in the 80s they established on the land of the village the settlement of Carmel. And July 2025, from the other side, they start digging to create a new illegal outpost, which is today existent with this around 15 caravans and paved road are there. And this how actions by occupation taken. First in the 80s they established the settlement and they ordered demolition orders to the Palestinians' homes, so they legitimize their existence as illegal settlers, and they delegitimize um, our existence as a Palestinians, and now they continue to create the illegal outpost. And that month, like July 2025, the biggest tragedy happened to us, where Auda Hadalin, our best friend and brother, were murdered while he was standing with his child in front of the community center filming the settlers like driving over olive trees of his family. That settler shot him with his pistol in the chest and he passed away. And they continued since that month, as we said, establishing the outpost. And then the military ordered again for most of the community demolition orders, and now the whole community under serious threat of destruction by the military. While you see just next to it an illegal outpost being like constructed, as we said, like with sewage, with water, with electricity, with paved roads. And the other hand, Palestinians living just meters away, doesn't have a road to go to school to be educated. So the form of pressure we we receive from this like occupation power is really in many different levels. Economically, it's totally like people living in really uh, a crazy situation. Employees are not receiving their salaries since years now. Workers are not allowed to go to work in our areas. Where people are farmers. Pick olive trees, graze animals, and like plowing the land. In the last 3 years, it have been going on very crazy. Settlers in Masaf Riyata created at least 9 illegal outposts just since October 7th. And when we're talking about this type of illegal outpost, they bring flocks of sheep or cows or goats, occupied one or two mountains with a few tents, with a military jeep. And they dig a road. The state facilitate for them water, electricity, roads, cars, money. drones, weapons, ATVs, which is used also as a weapon against us. It's weaponized, all these ATVs that was directly given to the settlers by the settler minister Smotrich. They use these ATVs to organize, pogroms, attacks, when they gather in one of these illegal outposts in dozens or hundreds of settlers, and they attack one of the communities. It's happening all across the West Bank, from Jordan Valley, to Ramallah, to South Hebron, to North Hebron now, as well, going after Palestinian shepherds, arresting Palestinian, shepherds. And, after October 7th, also, they start to use this new policy by a lot of these settlers are simply soldiers, So when they need, they put on shirt or pants with the M16, and they can arrest, children, men, shepherds, and Palestinians are being taken every day in Masafir Yatta. Every day they arrest Palestinians, simply take them to military bases in the area, abuse them, attack them, beat them up, lead them under the rain when it's in the winter now, under the sun, without water, without food, without phone, without informing a lawyer or the family, being beaten up, simply for grazing animals, in your land. And this is the crime a Palestinian would be done to be arrested by these militants. And then after a day or several hours, they release these Palestinians on for sure far away from they were taken, sometimes the middle of the night, in the evening. So you would even suffer by finding a way to go back home and not returning back phones of the Palestinians that have been arrested for, in many cases. Yeah, simply by establishing, all these illegal outposts and settlements and destroying Palestinian communities, or destroy them under what's so-called their laws, by military would invade a community, a town, and say you build a home or a school or a clinic or a road or water infrastructure illegal according to their racist and apartheid law, and they would destroy it by power, or they would send their Jewish terrorists, these settlers, wearing masks on their faces, burning, factories, killing Palestinians, burning homes, schools, attacking humans, even attacking solidarity activists that coming from abroad. And even these activists, after they've been attacked, they would be, deported by Israeli police, which is run by Ben Gvir. And then Masafir Yatta, also Israeli left-wing activists that comes in solidarity with Palestine, have been also beaten up, in some of the cases injured severely. And nothing, these settlers would not face any consequences by the Israeli authorities for those who ask about accountability for these settlers by their own state. For sure not, because they're doing the state project. They're sent here to the West Bank, sorry, and being paid and given weapons and money and power for to ethnically cleanse us from our land.
Yeah, and just briefly, I wanted to ask you, because I think you've mentioned something which I believe is perhaps understated, and maybe people understand the scale of it, but don't perhaps appreciate or recognize just how severe it can be. And that's you've written recently and just mentioned now that the kind of the torture and the abuse, the detention, and whether it's brief or whether it's longer periods of Israeli detention. And this has been, firstly, you've mentioned in a recent article, this has been a new form of, the interrogation, the abuse, the torture is being used by the settlers and by the Israeli army and the police to intimidate. But also, how important are Israel's kind of the prisons and the detention and the torture? How important is that to them? as a tool of this oppression, because I think people recognize the land theft, people recognize the apartheid laws, people recognize the land grabs, but I think when it comes to the kind of the Israel's prisons, Israel's detentions, Israel's grim treatment of Palestinians, and that's perhaps maybe an aspect that people don't quite understand the full depth of it.
Yeah, I mean, Israel did I would call it revenge against Palestinians, like prisoners in its tortured camps. I've been recording testimonies for Palestinian prisoners who uh, get out of Israeli uh, camps, and it's totally unbelievable. The Palestinian prisoners are like forgotten in the Israeli tortured camps. First, like the food became disaster, and this is like being celebrated and published by Ben-Gvir, the settler minister of like the police, who also controlled the Palestinian uh, prisoner, prisoners in Israeli jails. Yeah, a lot of people or all the Palestinian prisoners who left are really suffering in dehumanizing way. I never talked to anybody who left have been not like all of them have been beaten up in brutal way and attacked and dehumanized. And really like it need another like a discussion by its own to talk about like Palestinian prisoners who really um, face the death in these like camps, and there are dozens who died in the last 3 years in Israeli jails, being tortured by the police inside and the jails. I mean, yeah, and the numbers are get really high. There's almost every night invasion to cities and towns and camp and refugee camps in the West Bank, and Palestinians are being arrested by the military, most of whom are in these prisons with no charge, under what's so-called administrative detention. Some of them are journalists, activists, and minors, women, simply for posting something on Facebook or Instagram or saying something. The other day, uh, they arrest somebody from South Hebron and just to force him, for example, to resign from. He was elected for the municipality. Um, and he won, the election, and they arrested him, threatened him if he will not resign from the like his position, he will be killed or thrown in jail, and his home would be destroyed. So, and you're talking about like municipality elections, which is like councils and municipalities that like deal with the infrastructure of the city. So they intervene in all our life details and control it, and you can be arrested for simply very simple like reasons, and the only reason they do it because they can do it.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and I think it paints a picture of how this is all multi-pronged, and none of what Israel does is accidental. Mohammed, if I could come to you, because I know you have to dash. When we're talking about these different tactics and the different ways in which Israel oppresses the Palestinians, and that allows us to build an understanding about what's really happening, I wanted to ask you about the yellow line in Gaza, which is a naked form of occupation and land theft. I think they're controlling around 60% now. And, everybody has documented and reported on how even just being within 100 meters of their so-called line, which is they've now claimed the land and they've now stolen the land. This is first, if you could elaborate on the technicalities of that, but also to people, because people often like to frame this as this is just one, as is the retaliation, or it's simply the latest phase. But this is this is what Israel has been doing as a state for now 78 years. We commemorate the Nakba next week. But also its project is clear and explicit in its aims of settler colonialism, and Gaza is the latest manifestation. The genocide has allowed it to further its aims. And what could you say about this, Iran, and how we should understand Israel's objectives and how they are planning out in Gaza? Because I think some people often look at the starvation, the killing, the bombing almost as separate, almost as if Israel is making up as it goes along, it's seizing the opportunity. Whereas this is obviously systematic, this is obviously deliberate, right?
Thank you for raising this up, honestly. It hasn't been really much stated before that this is one of the forms of control that are taking shape every day, more and more to the worse in Gaza. So simply the yellow line is this physical barrier on the ground that Israel has installed, and it has divided Gaza into two since October 2025. When the ceasefire came into effect, under, the terms, it was basically maintaining this military control on the ground. Right now, it separates, over 50% of Gaza's territory, like basically deeming it inaccessible to the population. Now, almost 53% of the land is being controlled by Israeli military power. And now the entire population, over 2 million people, has been compressed into the western portion of the line, inward towards the sea. Now, the line was basically framed to be temporary or provisional, but it's not behaving as such. The Israeli military has built at least 30 military outposts along the line. It laid, roads for long-term operations, and its new chief of staff basically in Gaza declared it like the new border line, and that is basically a glimpse into what's being built there. Now, since the ceasefire was announced, we have seen and reported over 200 Palestinians who have been killed in its vicinity. Right now, Israel has been moving the yellow blocks, the physical blocks that are shaping this line, further into Gaza. In some areas, even early, 300 meters into where the population is, without any warning. And we have seen some satellite imagery analysis and experts saying this is basically entrenching even further control over Palestinian movement and land. Now, we have more than 2 million people, who are being told to shelter in the territory on the other side of the line, in less than 65 square kilometers, right? Which is intense. Now, I think the yellow line is normalizing Israeli control over huge parts of Gaza's territory. Now, Israel has previously and consistently used provisional frameworks of ceasefires and agreements and these diplomatic kind of deals to secure permanent territorial control, whether in Gaza or the West Bank. Now, I don't think this is going to be easily taken away. It's just like the reporting that's coming out of Gaza, which is basically very, very less than we had over the past 2 years, because almost every journalist who gets out to say what they need to say is basically targeted. Now, there is less testimony coming out of Gaza, specifically on matters like the yellow line. There is less footage coming out of Gaza. Basically, journalists are not able to report. They're operating without safety nets, without equipment, without gear, without any sort of institutional support. So, that is partly a responsibility on the world that it's on the other side of Gaza to keep just pushing even the conversation more to advocate for basically accessible movement of the people, the freedom of navigation within Gaza's borders. We're not talking about, the ability to travel. Now, the closing of the Rafah crossing is basically one horrible act, but it is one of the basically the restrictions of the inability of people to move forward. Now, within Gaza, people are not able to basically practice a day-to-day kind of sense of normalcy. Random fire by quadcopters along the line are still the backdrop. The tanks that are advancing, they're killing everyone on the way. They're demolishing houses on the way. And people are not able to return to the other side of the yellow line, which, again, huge parts of the lands that this yellow line consumed were basically agricultural lands before October 2023. Now, what this means is that the people's ability to survive is dependent on aid that's coming from outside. Now, that the crossings are, largely shut, their ability even to produce their own produce and food and agriculture is being limited by the ever-shifting yellow line that keeps even taking more land and more land by the day. And so it is that catastrophic, I think, that has consequences not only on simple rights like movement and freedom of mobility, but also on the people's ability to keep surviving a situation that just keeps deteriorating and keeps getting worse every day.
That's it. I think that's why when, for example, Rashid Khalidi and other people have said this is just the latest in this phase. This is what it's always been about. This isn't a surprise, and also it's worth remembering that right from the beginning, the settler movement, the Israeli state, the architecture of this project said from the beginning what their ambitions are, and they've carried that out. As we draw to a close, I would also like to remind people that it was just World Press Freedom Day the other day, and as you mentioned, the crimes of Israel are not as documented now, not out of laziness, not out of unavailability, but because literally the fact that Israel has been systematically killing journalists, and it's from whilst other mainstream journalists and other journalists offer robotic recitations and renditions about journalists suffering, it's their coverage that has covered and provided the smokescreen for these Palestinians that have been killed so brutally for more than 3 years now. And again, we talk about 3 years as the commemoration of the genocide, kind of where this all started. But the bottom line is that this has been a practice long ago, and Israel's been committing the same crimes for several decades now. So yeah, I think this has been really, really fruitful, really productive, and I think both yourself, Mohammed, and Basel, you are testament to the fact that there is Palestinian resolve that will never submit in the face of Israel's oppression. And as I said, you're both it's been an honor to moderate this, and I think it's been really productive, really enlightening, and eye-opener as well, because people understand that there is occupation, people understand there is ethnic cleansing, people understand there is land theft, but they don't understand the intricacies, they don't understand how this affects daily life, they don't understand that the objective is the same, but across the West Bank, across the 48 territories, across Gaza, it has an impact. It has an impact on those who have left. It has an impact on those who have fled. It has an impact on those who have family still remaining in Palestine. And your experiences and your testimonies today have been really helpful, really fruitful, really productive, and really sobering. Hopefully, we can have conversations in more pleasant surrounding the next time and in a liberated Palestine. So thank you both, and thank you to Equator, Gavin, Evan, and Vashti for this opportunity. This has been really productive, and I'm looking forward to the next time. And please do follow Basil's work and Mohammed's work. They both do such good work documenting Israel's crimes on the ground. And yeah, it's been a real honor to be amongst you both. And it's a reminder that no matter what Israel tries, we have, as this panel is a testament to, we have real Palestinian intellectual heavyweights who are carrying the Palestinian flag, raising the Palestinian flag. And yeah, keep up the amazing work, and may you all be protected. And hopefully, like I said, we reunite in a liberated Palestine very soon.
Inshallah. Thank you, Hamza.
All the best.